Are we live? I mean, I don't mean it that way. Okay, so where's David? All right, so here is the following list, which we have to talk about. I have at least 10 things. One is anonymity, confidentiality, privacy, and HIPAA. Second is Israel burial. Third is tattoos, suicide, embalming, creation, organ donation, murder, 7th of Adar, and Geniza. That should take us about 5 minutes. Okay. Let's start with this. We'll let David talk for a minute. Israel. Okay. Let's start about Israel burial. Come on up here so you can be part of my microphones.
So when a family calls us and they want to ship the body to Israel, there's something that needs to happen. There's the regular stuff that would happen with each family. They would come to make funeral arrangements. This is where we're going to take all the vitals information for the death certificate and the permit of burial, all the legal papers that are necessary. Then we will ask the family what exactly they want us to do. In Israel, they usually ask us to do the tahara in California. And the reason why we're doing that is because the moment the plane lands and the casket comes out, and it usually goes with United, which is the direct flight with United. It arrives at night to Israel. It stays at Ben Gurion, the airport, overnight in their coolers, and then early in the morning they come and pick up, and they go directly to the cemetery for burial. Other than that, we need to ask the family to contact the Chevra Kadisha in Israel, the receiving party, okay, and they should send us a letter via email with a place for burial to show that there is a cemetery plot in Israel, and that they will do the pickup from the airport. With all that paperwork, I would go to the Israeli consulate, who are going to give us the permit to board the plane. And that's what happens when we ship it to Israel.
Any questions about that?
David, I have a question.
Yeah.
So the burial there, is it in the casket or is
No,
it
good
shroud
question.
burial?
Good question. So the way we ship a body to Israel is in a metal container, sealed metal container, because only like that you can fly international. And that metal container goes into what we call the encasing box. It's called an air tray. So it's a wooden at the bottom, and then a cardboard around it. And then when it arrives to Israel, they take the body out of everything, and they just bury it in the shrouds. Other questions?
We shipped our mother across the country many years ago, and we were told that to ship a body you had to embalm it.
Right,
Oh,
Is that
that's a
true?
big mistake. I don't know if you did with
Yes.
cyanide, but if you did with cyanide,
No.
that has changed.
Yeah,
Okay.
there is no law anywhere
Exactly.
that one has to be embalmed. Period. Not in order to ship across countries.
Not in the United States. Not in the United States.
Yes.
I mean that I know of. But in Europe, if you ship from Europe to the United States, they actually demand for the person to be embalmed.
Right.
Yeah.
But don't let anybody tell you that that you have to be embalmed in order to go to Oregon.
You have to embalm for, wasn't there like 3?
And I don't know.
Was there what? 3?
Certain causes of death you would have to embalm if you were shipping.
I've never heard of that.
Okay.
Me neither.
Well, that makes 2 of us.
Okay.
Okay. No. Look, there are a lot of misinformation, to say the least, about a lot of stuff. Embalming is one of them. It's a biggie. Yeah.
If a person is put into a mausoleum,
Yes. Into mausoleum?
yeah,
Yeah.
how can they have a tahara ceremony and then get embalmed? No.
So when you go to a mausoleum, you don't have to be involved. You don't have to be involved. It's like burial in above ground, which happens even in Israel. Okay, what's going to happen is that you're going to have the tahara, you're going to have the shrouds, going to be put in a halana, in a casket. And then once you get to the cemetery, some of the cemeteries in Colma, well, the Jewish cemeteries at least, they will do a bio-seal over the casket, meaning they'll take a nylon and they will wrap the casket, and then they will put that in the crypt, like that.
There's no, yeah.
I just had this experience of seeing my cousin go into,
Yeah.
he was embalmed, but he didn't ever have, and he was dressed in a suit and the whole bit.
So that was his choice. That was his choice.
It could be a choice too.
Yeah, it was choice.
So he never had a formal ceremony.
Right. Well, and also there, often there are rules that are set up not by government, either federal or local or state, but by the cemetery. For example, there are certain a lot of cemeteries require what are called liners. If you go to Sinai, for example, there is a liner. It's got 4 sides, concrete, and a top. Nothing on the bottom. But that's a requirement. That's not a state requirement. That's not a state requirement. Sometimes, for example, in the new cemetery, Gan Shalom in the East Bay, they do have liners, but it was a deal. Well, the deal was, we'll put in liners and the neighbors will allow us to do that, because they were afraid of the big word seepage, which is, I mean, animals die, and I mean, it makes no sense. So they were afraid of seepage, and the way they got the permit to bury and to create that cemetery was by saying, okay, we'll do liners.
LA has liners.
Sorry?
In both, I was shocked to see this 15 years ago that my brother had to have a liner.
Yep.
And they said that it was
Yeah.
the city of LA County. They said LA County.
Okay, there may be, I don't think it's a county, I think it's a local requirement. Okay. Okay. Okay, what he just said to me, was talk about, for a minute, about Gan Yarok. Gan Yarok is the green cemetery that I helped establish up in Marin. It's in the Golden Gate National Preserve. It is a cemetery which does not require liners. You cannot be embalmed and be buried there. You can also be buried, the casket has to be totally wood, no metal, and there are very few like that. By the way, there's a lovely casket that's a basket. Willow. But it's made out of, it's a casket, it really is, but it's perfectly kosher because it's made out of willow and weaved together. So one cannot be embalmed, one can be buried in a casket, or one can be buried at our cemetery only in shrouds if you want. So this is really this cemetery has to meet the ecological conditions of the entire environment. So we have to obey what kind of pesticides, no pesticides, quite totally natural. We've now expanded, we now have 2 sections. We've expanded into another area under trees, and people are buried around in trees, under trees. What Fernwood, that's the name of the cemetery, did for us is just amazing. They came to us and asked for and asked us to help get a Jewish cemetery going, and we gave them all kinds of conditions, and they met them. So there are 3 sections in the cemetery. There's an Orthodox, there's a conservative, and there's a community section. They're separated by, well, but everybody's together, separated by a certain amount of length. There's no concrete. There's no concrete. It's all either wood or dirt, whatever, to go down. Any of the markers in that cemetery, there are no upright markers. There's only natural boulders that are inscribed. They're polished, but they're inscribed also. I didn't want to make he asked me to do it. Okay, Yes.
No, that was gonna be, because I read about Skanagamurok, and I was gonna ask about the headstones, that it wasn't traditional headstones, and I thought that was really cool.
No, 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 they are traditional headstones.
No,
This-
but I mean, like, not what you're sort of using.
No, they're not, yeah.
Yeah.
They're really, they're quite lovely, some of them. They're also, when people were buried in the Bible, there was a gal Evan, a pile of rocks that were put on top of them. So we're just following in the natural way that things used to be, yeah.
So there's no law that you have to be buried in a casket type of thing, or, okay?
With us.
No, no, I mean, I had assumed there was some sort of governmental law that's.
Nope.
Not in
Then
the
why,
state of California.
then why in Israel without, and that's not what you live?
Yeah, in Israel, one is buried.
How did it happen that there other people are buried in shrouds and they're buried in coffins?
Oh, okay. Think Civil War. Okay? Civil War is when funeral homes started. It used to be called that funeral homes would not be called funeral homes, it would be called funeral parlors, right? Taken from the fact that houses had parlors, which is when you died, that's where you were until you were buried. So funeral homes took the parlor part, said funeral parlors. What happened in the Civil War was that soldiers who died in the South from the North had to get back to the North. So somebody had to figure out how to get them from the South to the North, hence funeral homes, parlors on a larger scale, and they had to be transported somehow. You couldn't put them on a stretcher, you had to put them in a box. That's how it started. Okay, I'm gonna, what?
Keep going.
No. Okay, one more, just one more quickie. Quickie, one of these. Tattoos. How many of you think that if you have a tattoo, you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery? Well, you're all right, because you knew what the answer to that question was. I shouldn't have asked it that way. Okay, yes, one can be buried in a Jewish cemetery with a tattoo, period. Even Orthodox.
People think otherwise.
What? How many people think otherwise? Yeah, yeah, right. No, just know that these are all common misconceptions about what all of this is.
But you can't go to the mikvah.
But you can't go to the mikvah. Okay. Yes.
So I have a question. The Orthodox Cemetery in Peoria, Illinois, used to, I don't think they still do this, but all if the deceased committed suicide or they were a pauper, they were buried on the
Good.
outside.
All right. Suicide. That was the next one on the list. Thank you. You did it. Okay. Good. All right. Suicide. Up until recently being 30, 40 years, something like that. Up until then, suicide was considered to be an act of treason against God. You were a gift of God. How could you destroy it? Essentially. And people who committed suicide were buried on the outskirts of the cemetery. Right? Today, almost everyone I know at least considers suicide to be an illness. If I had the measles and I died, I would be buried in a cemetery. If I was a suicide, I am now buried in that cemetery. You want to talk about paupers too? Okay, paupers, mate mitzvah. Mate mitzvah is the mitzvah that if you happen to be in the field and you see a dead body, what do? Well, you get people from the town that's closest to it to come and say, I don't know who this is, or whatever. Everyone has to take that body and be responsible for it and bury it. Even a Kohen can touch the body and do it. I mean, that's how, namely the Jewish communities all over the world take care of people who are either paupers who can't afford it, and there are There are ways in which both Sinai and almost every cemetery I know, and funeral home I know, and very often Jewish federations and Jewish family service have funds for what's called indigent burial. It is completely a mitzvah, and a mitzvah from the Torah. It's not even, there's not even a question about that. It's like, that's...
And we'll do Tahara as well.
And well, everybody who comes to Sinai, dead, gets a Tahara. I had a, when you walk into Sinai, you don't, it's not a prerequisite for going into this new building. Right? Okay. But everybody who comes, every person who dies gets a Tahara. You have to refuse it. It's one of the only places I know, only funeral homes I know, where that is the case. And this is amazing. I mean, this is truly an amazing situation. I don't know of any other community that does it. I know. I mean, my chevra does it at Netivot Shalom, where we say very simply, "Here's what you get. Here's the package. The package includes a tahara, casket, all these kind of things. You don't have to worry about whether you have the right tie for your deceased. Don't worry about that. We'll take care of it." So, okay, you got it. We did a few of them. We'll do more, the rest of them next time. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about Shmirah.
Shmirah, right. So, and I will say that the same is true at the Joint Jewish Burial Society in England. Also, everyone gets a tahara. So that's my other home. Okay. This is that one. Oh. Okay. We got it? It's real? Okay. Gam ki elech begets al mavet lo yirara. Gam ki elech begets al mavet lo yirara. Ki atai madi, ki atai madi. Where does this come from? Which psalm? 23rd Psalm. And what does it say?
Even though we walk through
Ki atai madi. Lo irara. Lo irara.
I will not fear.
Right? I won't be afraid, right? I will fear no evil. So, we've been talking a lot about the ceremony of Tahara very specifically. But the Chevra Kadisha does a whole lot more than Tahara. You might think of it as sort of that Tahara is almost like the crown of what we do. But what we do as members of the Chevra Kadisha, of the Holy Society, starts way before that moment and continues even after the Levaya, after the body has been buried or given back in whatever way that happens. And we talk about Tahara and Shmirah as if they are separate functions, but Shmirah, to be a shomer, what does that mean? What does that word mean? A guardian. And Rabbi Kelman and I have had a conversation about this and about, well, what are we guarding nowadays? It's not like we're worried about vermin or body snatchers or anything like that, But my father of blessed memory was a Marine. So I grew up with this understanding of the honor guard, right? It's not like and you can even think about the 60 warriors, right? When we are being shomrim, when we are watching over the body of the deceased, honor guard. But even when we're performing tahara, or when we're sitting with the body, even when we're in a situation like this and we are learning about our practices, I believe that even in these moments, like right now, we are being shomrim. And what are we being the guardians of? We're being the guardians of our tradition, right? So if we're sitting at with the body before or after the tahara, we're definitely in the act of shmirah at that time. But I believe that anytime we are performing the functions of a Chevra Kadisha, we are always shomrim, we are always the guardians of the tradition, we're the guardians of our community. So I know that we don't have a whole lot of time here, but I'd like for you to imagine for a minute, if you would indulge me and just close your eyes and think about somebody that you love who has passed. And imagine, if you will, that you have a half an hour to sit with the body of that person after they have died and after their tahara has been performed. And you're sitting quietly somewhere with them, with the opportunity to review your time together, that person's time on this earth, from when they were small up to the moment of their death, however long that may have been. It may have been a couple of years, God forbid. It may have been, as it was for me the other night, my friend who died at the age of 102, who I'd known for decades. And you have this time together. You have this time together to sit in the holiness, to really sit with the great mystery that is not just the moment of death, but the time of passing. The time when those two who seemed as one, the body and the soul, however you define that, they separate and go their separate ways, however you understand that. But I can tell you, if you've been performing Tahara for as long as I have, you know, there's something extraordinary that takes place. And it's even more extraordinary because we don't really know what it is. But when you have the opportunity to sit with the body of someone, whether you knew them or not, and to maybe reminisce, if you did know that person, or to simply read Psalms aloud to them, or to sit in the stillness and listen for what may come through, which sometimes is extraordinary. I've heard stories of someone after sitting with the body for a couple of hours and come away saying, why did I just feel like I was at a Broadway show. I've been listening to Broadway music, or I've been feeling like I was in the Catskills, or something like that, and then you find out who that person was in their lifetime. Or you read poetry. Or you talk about the family and say, you know, I just saw Auntie this afternoon and she's sad, but she's okay, and I wanted you to know that. And often I find that if somebody is really interested in joining the Chevra Kadisha, but they're not quite ready to do the ceremony of Tahara, or, as was my entry point into Chevra Kadisha, I was disabled. I had an injury, and there was a whole year in which I really couldn't do anything. I couldn't even sign my name. But my friends were just starting the Chevra, and I realized that what I could do was sit with the body. I could sit there and read Psalms. I felt a little less disabled because there was something that I could do. There was a way that I could help. And so you might think in your community of people who maybe don't have the physical capacity or the stamina to do Tahara, but they could very well be sitting with a body. And give them that opportunity. Or you yourself might not feel quite ready to step into that Tahara room, but you could get used to the idea by sitting with the body, which has already happened. And maybe you're the last person who sits with that body until it's time for the Levaya. You know, time for that body to go to the cemetery. And maybe you find yourself going out and getting in your car and driving behind the hearse because you just can't quite let go. It's an extraordinary experience. And sometimes we think of Tahara as being what it is that we do, but I want to remind you that there is so much more. There is so much more, and as Rabbi Kelman was talking about the sandwich, you know, don't forget that Shmirah is, in a sense, both ends of the sandwich, and Tahara is in the center, right? And it's an amazing experience if you're sitting with the body and you can see the contours of the body under a sheet because Tahara hasn't happened yet. And you can see the nose. You can see, there's the belly, the knees, the toes. And you know that person is underneath there, that body is underneath there, and the only thing that's separating you is a drape. It's a precious time. It's an amazing opportunity. It's not something to miss out on. It's a sacred task. So, one of the sheets that you have, and don't go wrestling. Don't go wrestling. Take it with you. Just take it with you and read it later, because I really would like to just stay with this feeling. You know, because we spend so much time talking about what we're doing, but there's nothing like actually doing it. You know, and I was just talking with somebody at the break about lo these many years later, when I'm contemplating doing a tahara, that's the hardest part. Once I get into the room, I fall in love every time. And every time I do this ceremony, it's deeper and richer, and the liturgy has more to say to me. And my experience is that it's almost like there are, you know, if you think about a train and there are two rails that hold that train and move it along, the liturgy and the practical things that are taking place at the same time are like these two pathways. And my understanding is that the liturgy is moving the soul along, moving the neshama along, at the same time that we mitaharim are performing these practical functions at the same time. So as I was saying earlier, that moment where we're saying remove the soiled garments, and we're removing whatever, you know, we might be removing fingernail polish or cutting off a tag from the hospital or whatever it is. We're doing these two things simultaneously, and it really gives us a sense of the miraculous. You know, it's so easy to think of death as a tragedy, but there's another level on which it's just as miraculous as birth, just as impossible to understand. So I really want to give you that and say, don't miss an opportunity to sit Shmirah with a body, because you don't have to do anything but be fully present. In fact, one of the things on this list is talking about, well, who does this kind of stuff? And you might think about these incredibly busy lives that we have, you know, where we're processing through as many choices and as many tasks and as many ways. Just imagine being able to just sit and be for a couple of hours. That's Shmirah. Just to be in the silence, just to be in the absolute presence. So take these green sheets with you and look at them later, and maybe next time we get together, if you have any questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful and inspiring. The practical question.
Yes.
There restrictions on family members doing Shmirah? Very close. Okay. I'm a little concerned about the time, and what I think I'd like to do is to pick up the practical stuff next time, because there's a few other things as well. What do you read? And can family do it? Should family do it? Let's do that next time.
And there's another logistic question. How will you organize if people can sit Shmirah for some period of time?
And that's one of the things we're working on right now.
Right.
What we're really working on at the moment is a structure which has one person at each synagogue, not the rabbi. Oops. Oh, hello. Is one person at each synagogue being a coordinator for that synagogue, both for Tahara and to find someone else to be a coordinator for Shmirah, if that person thinks that that's too much. Plus one person who will convene all of these three people to do educational programs, etc. Aside from that green sheet tonight, there's two other things. One is a sheet that was outside called, otherwise known as 99 Things You Can Do. And they're not, most of them are not Tahara. So I want to really make that doubly clear that people can do that. Second, I have these little brochures about Kavod V'Nichum. That's the organization that we work with, and the Gamliel Institute, which is the educational arm of Kavod V'Nichum. We also have a conference coming up at the beginning of June, and this is all the course offerings for 2019. I'm going to leave it over here, plus one other gift. This is a book called Nichum Avelim, which Dan and I and an Orthodox rabbi, Dan, by the way, belongs to a Reform congregation, and an Orthodox rabbi from Los Angeles, we wrote this together. It's a book called Nichum Avelim, a guide for the comforter. This is not, how can I say it? My idea was, I wanted to find a moment where we could teach about what the Jewish approach is to death and dying. And where's that educational moment? The only moment that I could find that would make any sense would be when people show up at a funeral. Because usually when you show up at a funeral, you sit down, there's a little piece of paper that one gets, or 2 sheets or whatever, which may have Kaddish on it, or El Malek, something like that. And I realized that that's the perfect time. This is a guide for a person who shows up at a funeral. It's not for the mourner, though obviously mourners can read it. But it goes step by step. What happens at a funeral? What should you be doing now? Should you go up to the person? Should you go up to the mourner? What happens at the cemetery? What happens at a house of mourning? What should you say at a house of mourning? What should you not say at a house of mourning? That's probably the most important part of this book. Some prayers at the end, but it was written for mourners. It was written specifically for people who show up at a funeral, and it was done in this size. Because if it was larger than this, you wouldn't take it home. If it's this size, it's a bencher size. It fits in a pocket and it fits in a purse, and you would hopefully take it home. That was the importance of it. So we're inviting you here, and I will leave these couple of the Nichum brochures right here. Oh, they're up here. Here you go. Thank you, David. Okay. They're right here, and the brochures are right here as well. Okay, and we'll get to some of those. Oh, but
Well, how can we get handouts from a session we missed, like we missed last time?